The year was 1865, and the Silver River ran red beneath the sinking sun. The mountains stood like solemn witnesses, their dark spines cutting against the amber light. Along the rocky shore, a woman stood motionless, her rifle steady in her hands, though her breath came sharp and uneven. Her name was Clara Hale, and she had tracked the man standing before her across 100 miles of wilderness and grief. Elias Ward's face was a map of dust and regret. His revolver hung loose at his side, the faint tremor of exhaustion in his fingers betraying the calm he tried to wear. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice low, the sound carried off by the wind. Clara didn't answer. Her eyes, dark as the river depths, stayed fixed on him. Somewhere behind her, the forest whispered with life, birds calling low and cautious, sensing the storm between them. Elias took a slow step forward, and she lifted the barrel an inch higher. "Stop there," she said. He froze. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, two ghosts of what had been, caught in the dying light of a land that devoured the weak. It hadn't started here. It had started 3 days earlier in a trading post that smelled of tobacco, whiskey, and old pine. Clara had worked behind the counter that morning, her father whistling softly as he sorted through pelts. Life had been steady, simple, though hardship clung to every corner of that wooden place. They had carved out a kind of peace at the edge of the known world, where survival meant stubbornness more than luck. Then he walked in. Elias Ward, tall, confident, with the kind of charm that could buy trust faster than gold. His boots were worn, his clothes travel-stained, but his eyes, they carried a weight, something restless, like a man running for more than time. "Evenin', ma'am," he had said with a nod, his voice smooth as polished oak. "Got any cartridges for a Winchester?" Clara had met his gaze briefly, something wary in her tone. "Depends who's a skin dot." He smiled at that, a quick, disarming grin, and handed her a few coins. "Just a man looking to stay alive." Her father, John Hale, had laughed from behind the counter. "Aren't we all?" By dusk, the stranger was sharing their fire. He'd said little about his past, only that bounty hunters were on his trail for a crime he didn't commit. Clara hadn't believed him, not entirely, but there had been a softness in the way he spoke, a kind of worn decency beneath the rough edges. She saw it when he offered to chop wood, when he thanked her for the meal. She saw it, too, when he lingered by the door, eyes searching the horizon as though afraid of what the dark might bring. That night, she had woken to the sound of boots. The door creaked. She rose, heart pounding, to find her father standing in the lamplight, rifle raised. Elias was there, too, his hands shaking, his face pale. "Put down, John," Elias whispered. "Ain't no need for this." "You've been lying since the moment you stepped through that door," her father said. "There's bounty on your head, boy. I seen your face on the wanted papers." Elias's jaw tightened. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt." But then the shot rang out. One moment of panic, her father's finger twitching, Elias diving for cover, and the sound split the night like thunder. When Clara reached them, her father was on the floor, the lamplight flickering across his still face. The locket her mother had given him years ago glinted near his open hand. Elias's revolver smoked in the dark. He ran before dawn. Clara buried her father by the cottonwoods behind the post. The morning sun broke through the clouds, cold and unforgiving. There were no tears, just the weight of silence and the promise of vengeance. She loaded her father's rifle, packed the few supplies she had, and rode out toward the mountains. The trail was merciless. The air grew thin, the ground rough. Twice she nearly lost her horse to the cliffs. Once she spent a night in the rain, fireless, listening to the howl of wolves in the distance. But she pressed on, following the faint signs he'd left behind, a torn scrap of fabric, the ashes of a dying campfire, footprints along the riverbank. At night, his voice echoed in her memory. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt." Lies, every one of them. When she finally saw him again, standing by the Silver River with the same revolver that had killed her father, her hands didn't tremble. Elias shifted his weight now, the river's murmur filling the silence between them. "You gonna shoot me, Clara?" She swallowed hard. That depends. You still think you can lie your way out of what you did. His eyes flicked to the horizon, then back to her. I didn't lie. Not about the bounty. Not about the killing. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. Then how is it supposed to happen? She asked, her voice sharp as glass. You rob us. Maybe leave him breathing long enough to apologize? He took another step. She didn't lower the gun. I was desperate, he said. They were coming for me that night. Your old man, he wouldn't listen. I just needed enough to get across the river. That's all. Clara laughed, once, the sound bitter and low. My father died for a handful of coins and a coward's excuse. Something broke in his expression then. The arrogance faded, replaced by something that almost looked like shame. You think I don't remember his face? I see it every time I close my eyes. The words struck her harder than a bullet could. For a moment, her breath caught, but then she steadied herself again. You don't get to speak his name, she said quietly. Not after what you did. Elias's hand hovered near his gun belt, and the air grew taut. Behind them, the forest held its breath. If you're going to shoot, he said finally, then do it. But know this, I've already been dead since that night. She hesitated, the river's wind tugging at her hair. For the first time, she saw the blood on his sleeve, the limp in his stance. He'd been running hard, hunted, beaten. The world had punished him, but it hadn't been enough. Clara's finger brushed the trigger. The thunder rolled across the valley, low and distant like the growl of something old and waiting. Elias looked toward the sound, then back at her, a faint smirk ghosting across his face. You think you're stronger than me, Clara? He said softly. You ain't seen the half of hell yet. She stepped forward, rifle unwavering, eyes locked to his. Then show me. The wind rose, cold and relentless, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of reckoning. The first drops fell on the dust between them, darkening the earth where their shadows met. Neither moved. Somewhere deep in the forest, a branch cracked, sharp as the breaking of a vow, and beneath the growing storm, the silver river kept on running, steady, indifferent, and red as the past they both could never escape. Rain fell hard through the night, pounding against the river stones and drumming on the canvas of the earth. Clara sat near the fire, its weak flames snapping against the wet air. Elias lay slumped a few feet away, his face pale, his breathing uneven. She'd shot him, not to kill, but close enough to remind him she could. The bullet had grazed his shoulder, tearing flesh and pride alike. She should have left him there, should have let the rain drown his sins. But when the bounty hunters rode in at dawn, there'd been no time for hesitation. They came with torches and rifles, 5 men, mean and hungry. The first shot cracked through the trees, shattering the quiet. Clara ducked low, rolling behind a fallen log as splinters flew. Elias cursed, grabbing his revolver with his good arm and firing into the shadows. Horses reared, men shouted. The forest came alive with chaos. Go! Elias rasped, Get to the river. I'm not running. She spat back, firing a clean shot that dropped one of the hunters. The man fell into the mud with a grunt, his torch snuffed out in the downpour. You'll die here, damn it. Then so will you. The next bullet ripped through a tree trunk inches from her head. The smell of gunpowder burned through the rain. Clara reached for Elias, pulling him to his feet. He stumbled, blood slick on his arm, but she half-dragged, half-forced him into motion. They plunged into the forest, branches whipping their faces, the ground slick beneath their boots. Behind them, the hunters shouted and fired. Bullets whined through the dark, but the storm swallowed their aim. By the time the echoes faded, Clara and Elias had vanished into the deep timber, swallowed by mist and rain. They didn't stop until the river's roar drowned every sound of pursuit. Clara's chest heaved as she lowered him to the ground. He leaned against a boulder, eyes half closed, skin clammy. Guess you saved me, he muttered. Didn't see that coming. She glared at him, breathless. Don't flatter yourself. I just didn't want them taking what's mine to finish. Elias gave a dry, broken laugh. You got a strange way of showing mercy. I wasn't trying to. The fire she built barely held against the wet wind. Smoke clung to her hair, mingling with the scent of pine and blood. She tore a strip from his shirt, pressing it against the wound. He winced but said nothing. His silence was heavier than any curse. "You shouldn't come after me," he said, finally, his voice rough. "The frontier ain't kind to the ones who chase ghosts." Clara's hands paused on the bandage. "You took everything from me. You really think I'd just sit back and let you vanish?" "I didn't take nothing you didn't already lose to this land," he said, eyes opening. "We all bleed for it. Some of us just bleed sooner." She stared at him, the firelight carving hard lines into her face. "You talk like a man who wants forgiveness." He turned his gaze toward the flames. "I stopped wanting that a long time ago." The night deepened, the rain easing to a whisper. Clara sat across from him, her rifle in her lap, her eyes fixed on the fire. For a while, neither spoke. The forest around them was alive with quiet sounds, the soft rush of the river, the distant cry of a wolf, the creak of trees bending under the wind. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost lost in the rain. "You said it wasn't supposed to happen that way. What did you mean?" Elias shifted, the firelight flickering across his tired face. "Your old man wasn't the one I meant to hurt. I came for the money, that's true. But when he drew on me," he stopped, jaw tight, "I fired before I even thought. I still hear it, Clara. Every night. Don't." Her voice cracked, barely a whisper. "Don't make him sound like an accident. I can't change what happened," he said, "but I didn't walk away clean. You think you're the only one carrying ghosts? Look at me." He spread his hand, palms scarred, trembling. "Ain't nothing left worth savant." Clara's eyes glistened with anger and something else she couldn't name. "You don't get to feel sorry for yourself." He smiled faintly. "Wouldn't dare." A gust of wind scattered the fire's embers, and for a heartbeat, their faces were lit in flashes of orange and shadow. Clara saw the truth then. Not the outlaw the posters claimed, not the monster her grief had painted, but a man undone by his own mistakes. Still, she told herself, that didn't matter. Regret was too small a price. When dawn broke, the forest was gray and dripping. They moved again, Elias slower now, his strength waning. The bounty hunters would circle back, she knew. The storm had bought them time, nothing more. Ahead lay the Silver River's crossing, swollen and wild from the rain. Clara stood at the edge, boots sinking into the mud. "We cross here," she said. Elias looked at the torrent. "That's suicide." "So's waiting." He tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. "You really do got your father's spine." Her glare softened just barely. "Don't you dare say his name again." They waded in. The current was fierce, biting cold. Water climbed to their waists, then their chests. Elias stumbled, clutching her arm. The river roared, greedy and endless. Clara gritted her teeth, pushing forward, every step a fight against the current. Halfway across, Elias slipped. The water pulled him under, dragging him downstream. "Elias!" she shouted, plunging after him. Her fingers brushed his coat once, then again. She caught hold, pulling with everything she had. For a terrifying moment, she thought she'd lose him. Then they broke free onto the opposite bank, collapsing in the mud, gasping. For a long while, neither moved. The only sound was the river's relentless rush. Finally, Elias rolled onto his side, coughing up water. "Guess you're not letting me die. Just yet." "Not until I decide it," she said, voice trembling from cold and fury. He looked at her then, really looked. The fire in her eyes had changed. It was no longer just hate. There was something fierce and human beneath it, something he couldn't name. As the clouds broke and weak sunlight touched the valley, Clara found herself staring at the river. The current glittered, bright and merciless. Somewhere beneath its surface lay the weight of what she'd lost and what she still carried. Elias pushed himself up on one arm. "You could have let me drown." "I know. Why didn't you?" Clara didn't answer. She just looked out over the water, the wind tugging at her wet hair. The silence between them was heavier than words. After a moment, Elias spoke again, quieter this time. "Maybe you ain't the one needin' revenge anymore. Maybe you're the one needin' peace." Her jaw clenched, her hands curling into fists. "You don't get to tell me what I need." He nodded slowly, wincing as he adjusted his wounded arm. "Didn't mean to. Just maybe you should think on it." She turned toward him, eyes sharp as steel. "You just make sure you live long enough to face what's coming. Then we'll see who needs peace." Elias met her gaze and, for the first time, didn't look away. The wind carried the faint cry of a hawk overhead, circling above the endless green. The storm had passed, but another was coming, one born not of clouds, but of everything left unsaid between them. The fire in the distance was gone. The hunters were regrouping. The chase would begin again, but this time, Clara wasn't running from vengeance. She was walking straight into whatever truth lay ahead. The sun rose like a blade over the ridgeline, sharp and unforgiving. Smoke curled thinly above the valley, a settlement in the distance, its roofs glinting faintly through the morning haze. Clara and Elias watched from the tree-lean, weary and hollow-eyed. The river behind them whispered like a memory that refused to fade. Elias leaned against a boulder, his breath shallow. The wound in his shoulder had festered, dark and angry beneath the torn bandage. "That's pine hollow down there," he said, voice hoarse. "Ain't much, but there's a dock. Might patch me up before those hunters catch our scent again." Clara didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed fixed on the faint shapes of men moving through the settlement, armed men. "They're already there," she said quietly. Elias followed her eyes, his jaw tightening. The bounty hunters had beaten them to it. Horses were tied out front, dust rising where boots scuffed the street. The world seemed to shrink around them, two fugitives against the weight of every bad choice they'd ever made. He managed a grim smile. "Guess it's time to finish this." Clara turned toward him, incredulous. "Finish this? You can barely stand." "Then I'll fall standin'," he said. "Ain't running anymore." She stared at him for a long moment. In his face, she saw what was left of the man she'd once wanted to hate, a man hollowed out by guilt, but still reaching for some last scrap of dignity. "You're going to get yourself killed," she said. He gave a short laugh. "Maybe that's the only thing I got left to do right." The words sat heavy in the cold air. Clara looked down at her rifle, the same one that had belonged to her father. Her reflection glimmered faintly in the metal, hard, pale, and tired. They descended slowly through the pines. Every step felt heavier than the last. By the time they reached the outskirts of Pine Hollow, the street was nearly empty. The air smelled of whiskey and old wood. The saloon doors creaked in the wind, and the echo of spurs carried faintly from inside. Elias stopped beside her, eyes scanning the buildings. "You don't have to follow me in there," he said, quietly. "You think I've come this far to watch from the trees?" she replied. He looked at her, really looked, and nodded once. "Then we finish it together." Inside, the saloon was dim and thick with smoke. 3 of the bounty hunters sat at a poker table, their laughter low and mean. A 4th leaned against the bar, cleaning a rifle. The 5th, Cole Tanner, their leader, stood near the piano, hat low, his eyes as cold as a wolf's. Elias stepped through the doorway, his boots dragging just enough to draw their attention. Clara followed, rifle leveled at her shoulder. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Tanner's grin split the silence. "Well, I'll be damned," Tanner drawled. "Elias Ward, the ghost himself. Bounties doubled since last week. Dead preferred, but I reckon breathin' pays the same." Elias's hand hovered near his revolver. "I ain't here to make you rich, Tanner." The man chuckled, nodding toward Clara. "That her? The trader's girl? Thought you'd left her for buzzards." Clara's voice cut like flint. "You talk too much." Tanner smirked. "She's got bite. Shame you hitched your wagon to a corpse, sweetheart." Elias drew first. The shot tore through Tanner's hat brim and buried itself in the wall. The room exploded into chaos. Chairs shattered. Bottles burst. Gunfire cracked and echoed. Clara dropped behind a table, returning fire. The air filled with smoke and splinters. Elias moved like a man running out of time, his every step heavy but sure. He dropped one bounty hunter with a clean shot to the chest, then another who tried to flank him near the stairs. A bullet tore through his side, spinning him half around, but he kept firing. Clara caught the third man in her sights and pulled the trigger. His body jerked, then fell over the bar, crashing into broken glass. When the noise finally stopped, the saloon was wrecked, tables overturned, walls scarred with holes. Only Tanner remained, crouched behind the piano, his pistol trained on Elias. "Don't," Clara warned, her rifle aimed dead at him. Tanner sneered. "You think you're fast enough, girl?" "He ain't." Elias coughed, blood wetting his lips. "Maybe not," he rasped, "but she is." The sound of the shot was final, almost merciful. Tanner fell sideways, his gun clattering to the floor. Smoke curled from the end of Clara's rifle as silence filled the room again. Elias sank to one knee, his breath shallow, his hand pressed to his side. "Guess that's that," he murmured. Clara dropped beside him, catching his shoulders as he swayed. "Stay with me," she said. "You hear me? You don't get to leave it like this." He smiled faintly, eyes unfocused. "Ain't leaving nothing undone. You stood your ground, Clara. World Stilton in cause of that. Don't talk like it's over." He laughed softly, then winced. "It's always been over. Just took me a while to see it." The wind howled through the broken saloon door, stirring the curtains. Outside, the street lay empty, silent but for the rustle of dust in the wind. Elias's voice came weaker now. "Tell me something before I go. Did he, your old man, teach you to shoot like that?" Her throat tightened. "He taught me not to miss." Elias's lips curved faintly. "Good man." His gaze lifted once more, meeting hers. "I'm sorry, Clara." She wanted to hate him still, wanted to cling to that fury that had kept her alive all these miles. But when she looked into his eyes, she found no villain left, just a man too broken to outrun the weight of what he'd done. He drew one last breath. "Maybe we both get a rest now." And then he was still. Clara sat there for a long time, the fire in her chest dimming to a quiet ache. The world outside seemed frozen, the sun bright, the dust unmoving. Finally, she rose. She closed his eyes, holstered his revolver, and stepped out into the light. The settlement was quiet. People peered from doorways, wide-eyed, as she passed. She walked to the edge of town, where the land opened toward the river valley. Behind her, the saloon stood like a scar, smoke curling from its roof. By the water's edge, she dug a shallow grave beneath the cottonwoods. The same river that had once divided them now carried his sins away. She set his revolver on the mound, then took her father's locket from her neck and pressed it into the earth beside it. When she finally stood, the wind caught her hair, lifting it across her face. The sky was vast and pale, the horizon endless. Her voice came soft, carried by the breeze. "The frontier takes what it wants, but maybe it leaves something too." She mounted her horse and turned toward the open plains. The sound of hooves echoed faintly, fading into the distance. As the sun dipped low, the silver river shimmered once more, red, gold, and alive. Somewhere in its endless current flowed the ghosts of what had been, and the woman who'd learned to stand her ground rode on, carrying the silence of redemption with her. And as the wind settled, a voice seemed to linger in the air, quiet but certain. Asterisk, maybe the frontier ain't just a place. Maybe it's a test of will.